oversee the National Register and survey programs here in Eastern North Carolina. And today I'm going to be talking to y'all a little bit about the National Register, what it is, how it works, how you apply for the National Register, and some of the benefits of being listed. So, and at the end I'll have time for questions if you guys have any questions. But in addition to National Register at our office, we also, as I said, I oversee the survey program. So if y'all own a historic house, historic property, you're just looking for some information about it, we maintain survey files on over 140,000 properties across North Carolina with information about those properties. We might have some older photos of those properties. So if you own a historic house and you want some information, you can contact our office and we can send you that file if there is one in our office. And if not, we try to maintain as many files as possible on historic properties across the state so that one day if a hurricane comes, if, heaven forbid, some natural disaster comes along, and after all we're long gone, we'll have a record and documentation of those historic properties, the people who live there, and their impact on our communities. So that's one thing we do in addition to National Register, and the other thing we do is restoration services. So again, if you own a historic property and you're doing renovations, you have a question about repairing historic properties and maybe doing a rehabilitation project, our Restoration Services branch can provide you with technical advice, and they also oversee our tax credit program, which is a very successful program. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, but the Restoration Services branch are the people who can guide you through that process. So we do a lot of things here at the State Historic Preservation Office. Those are just some of the main things. Our office is in Greenville, so we're not too far away from y'all. We're always happy to come out and meet with people, talk to folks, and do site visits at individual properties if y'all have questions about a specific property. So like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about National Register, but I'm also happy to answer any other questions you may have at the end of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and get started.
We're in Greenville.
We're in the Humber House. If you know where Town Hall is, it's the big white house next to City Hall. Yeah, so we're that big white house downtown if you're ever in downtown Greenville. We're not far, we're just at Washington and 5th Street. So if you need to find us. And we're happy, if you want to stop by and talk to us, that's fine too. We're open to the public, so we're happy to talk to you there as well. So, but getting into what the National Register is. So the National Register was created in 1966 by the National Historic Preservation Act. It is the official federal list of buildings, sites, structures, districts, objects that are important to American history, culture, architecture, archaeology, and it is a federal program. It's overseen by the National Park Service at the federal level, which is underneath the Department of the Interior. And at the State Historic Preservation Office, we kind of serve as the go-between for the public and the Park Service. So if you're interested in applying for the National Register, we're going to work with you on kind of the state level to make sure that your nomination, your application, excuse me, it's all good to go before it goes up to the Park Service. So we kind of facilitate that process for the public. That's kind of our role in that process. The National Register is an honorary designation, and it's a great way to recognize the history and the importance and the heritage of a property or a city, town, whatever it may be. And it's a really wonderful program. It's, some people are just interested in it just for that recognition. It can really bring attention and awareness to a particular property, especially one that maybe you drive by every day and you don't notice. And suddenly it's been listed in the National Register and you start to see it in a different light. And that is one of the great things about National Register designation. So what does it mean to be listed in the National Register? We get this question all the time. The National Register is an honorary designation, and it doesn't place any obligations on a property owner to maintain their property, to preserve it, to open it to the public. If you're a private property owner using private resources, the federal government, the state government has no say in what you do with that property. You can alter it, put an addition on it, make changes to it, you can sell it, subdivide your property, you can demolish it, and the federal government, the state government would have no say in that. There are a few instances where that changes, and those are if there's any kind of federal involvement. Probably not going to apply to most individual property owners, but you might have an instance where maybe you're working with an organization where you're maybe getting federal money from a federal grant, or maybe there's a federal agency involved, say, I'm trying to think of an instance, like DOT, say there's a road project coming through. That might affect a National Register property. So that's an instance where we would get involved, where the federal government has some regulations involved. But in general, as a private property owner, if you're making changes on your own, with your own money, there's not going to be any involvement from our office or from the federal government. The other instance, so I mentioned grants, local, if you're working with like a local nonprofit or you're a local government, maybe a church group, and you've received a grant from either the state or the federal government, there might be restrictions and regulations there. or if you decide to do a tax credit project. So all of this is optional things that you have to opt into. Otherwise, there's no restrictions on you as a property owner. That really comes in at the local level. So when you have a local historic preservation commission, you don't have one here in Williamston, but there are lots of them across the east. You have a local commission that is working with the local government, the local municipality, and they create local historic districts or local landmark designations, and then they have the power to regulate those. And that's where you see people have to go before the commission and apply and to change their windows or to change the siding on the side of their house. If you've heard that kind of stuff, that's coming off the local level, not from the National Register. Oftentimes they kind of overlay each other, so a National Register district will often be within a local district, but they're two separate entities operating separate of one another. So just because you're listed in the National Register doesn't mean that you have to, there's any restrictions or regulations on your property. But there are some benefits to being listed in the National Register. As I mentioned, it's a great way to recognize the history and the heritage and the importance of a property. You know, especially early on when we were listing things, it was really focused on the big fancy houses and the really, you know, famous people and whatnot. And now we're looking at the local, really trying to focus more on that local level of people who were important to that town or that community, places that are important to that town or that community, and it's a great way to bring awareness to those areas of history that maybe we don't talk about as much, or maybe don't get as much attention on maybe the national scale. You're not going to hear about, you know, in the same way that George Washington is going to get the recognition, but these people are important to our towns and to our communities, so we want to recognize them if we can. There are also some other benefits. So first of all, National Register properties are subject to the Section 106 process. You may have heard of a road project coming through and then a road getting kind of diverted around a historic property. That's because of Section 106. Basically, that Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act requires big government agencies, when they're doing a road project, when they're doing a transmission line project, when they're putting in, say, a solar farm, to do archaeological and architectural surveys in order to determine if that project will have an impact on the historic resource. So they have to look for any listed properties and also any eligible properties, properties that aren't listed yet but could be listed in the future. That might be impacted by that project, and generally they do try and avoid impacting historic properties. It's not a guarantee, but it is at least a part of the conversation. They have to be taken into account. So it's not, again, it's not a guarantee, but generally they do try and avoid them, and you've probably heard of road projects or things getting diverted because of it. The really big benefit, and again, I'm not the tax credit person, so I'm not going to go on too much about this. I'm going to leave that to the experts. Is the tax credit program, the rehabilitation tax credit program. And this is a great program. It's both a federal and a state credit, depending on what kind of tax credit project you can do. And we have done billions of dollars in tax credit projects since the program began. And there's two forms of credits. There is a income producing and a non-income producing. The only major requirement, there's other requirements as well once you get into starting it, but the major requirement to be able to access this is that you need to be listed in the National Register, either individually, so your property on its own is listed, or it's a contributing resource to a historic district. And that designation, contributing, is something, it's just a term that the Park Service uses, and it's something that if you're in a district and you're interested in doing this, you can open up the nomination for that district and find your property and see what the designation is, or you can contact our office and we'll do that legwork for you. And we'll let you know. We're here to help. But that's the major requirement to access, to even get in the door for tax credits. But if you are listed or you're a contributing resource to a historic district, there are two kinds of credits. There's a residential credit or a non-income producing credit, which is for owner-occupied residential buildings. So maybe it's your primary residence, maybe it's a secondary residence, a family home where you do homecomings, things like that, but it's gonna be owner-occupied, essentially. You're not deriving any income from it, and that is a 15% state credit. And basically what that allows you to do is recoup a portion of the money that you put into restoring or rehabilitating a historic property in the form of a tax credit that comes off of your income taxes. So I'm not a tax expert, I'm not a restoration specialist, so I'm going to leave that to them, but I wanted to give you some basic information since it is such an excellent program. We've had such success here in North Carolina. So that's a residential credit. The other credit, and this is where we see a lot of work and a lot of big work, big properties like Rocky Mountain Mills was an example of a tax credit project. Where we're really transforming these big properties. So there's an income producing credit if you're deriving any form of income from a property. So it's a rental property, it's an Airbnb, it's a commercial building, industrial building, or industrial like complex that you're renting out, you're deriving rental income from, you can do a income producing tax credit. And that is a 20% federal and a 15% state credit. And so together that's 35, upwards of 35% return as a tax credit. And there is a 5% bonus for Tier 1 and Tier 2 counties, which is a designation from the Department of Commerce. And most of our counties across Eastern North Carolina are Tier 1 and Tier 2, so you could get upwards, if you're doing a commercial tax credit project, you could get upwards of 40% back in the form of a tax credit. So again, particulars, I'm going to leave that to the experts. The two restoration specialists who oversee that program here in the East are Reed Thomas and Chris Stone. I have the contact information at the end of this presentation, so if you have questions about whether or not your renovation project would work for tax credits, how it works, what the other requirements are, things like that, please reach out to them. They are super knowledgeable and very helpful. Reed is the person who oversees Martin County specifically, so if you have a property in Martin County, Reed Thomas is the one to contact, but if you call any of us, we will get you in the right direction. Those are some of the benefits of being listed in the National Register. But how do we list something in the National Register? What makes something eligible for listing? So there are two main criteria that we look at. The first is significance, so what makes a property important, what makes it special. And that can be on the national, the state, or the local level. And there are four main criteria that we look at: A, B, C, and D. Criterion A is for history. That's usually to do with, it might be a battle happened there, maybe a civil rights action happened there, or it could be something that property tells us something about the broader patterns of history. It doesn't have to be a specific event. It could be a school that tells us something about the evolution of education in that county. It could be a farmstead that tells us something about agriculture and the development of agriculture over time in that county. So it doesn't need to be a specific event. It could be something broader than that, but we're looking for that property to tell us something important about that place and that time. Then there's criterion B, which is for an important person. Again, it doesn't have to be George Washington. It could be a local leader. It could be someone who is very important on the local level, on the local scale. So we have the Davies House, which is in Halifax. We also have the Franks House, which is in Edenton. Both of these are for local people. And well, the Davies House is maybe a little more state because he was involved in UNC Chapel Hill and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't just need to be George Washington. It could be someone on the local level as well. Criterion C is for design or construction. This is where you're looking at your architecture, the engineering of a building. Is an example of a particular style, the work of an architect, very prominent architect or builder, things like that. We see bridges listed a lot under criterion C for their engineering. And so that's one that maybe you would know the most. You're walking around and you can see, oh, that's a beautiful high style house, is immediately think that could be eligible. We're not just looking for the fancy buildings, we're also looking for the ones that tell us something about maybe that area. Maybe it's a specific house type or form that we only see in this county or only see here in the East. So it's not just big fancy buildings, we take all buildings in all forms. And the last one is criterion D, and we don't really deal with this one as much. Typically, my office deals with the above ground resources, so things that you can see and touch. But archaeology is handled by the Office of State Archaeology, and so criterion D is information potential or archaeological potential. And this is for resources where you maybe have ruins, you have remnants of a settlement, or you're digging for archaeological resources and artifacts to learn something about history or prehistory. So if you have questions about archaeological resources or artifacts, please contact the Office of State Archaeology. They are really great to work with. They also cover cemeteries as well, so if you have cemetery questions, we have a very good cemetery expert. She is so enthusiastic and wonderful to work with. So please let us know if you have historic cemeteries that you need some help with as well. So that's our main significance criteria that we're looking at, but we also look at integrity. And integrity is a little less clear sometimes when I'm explaining it, but it's the ability of a property to convey its significance. You need to be able to walk up to that building, walk into that place, and really get that sense of time, that sense of history. Basically, it's the degree to which it retains its historic features and materials, its setting, all of those things that help to tell its story and communicate its history. So, for instance, you had a historic farmhouse, and originally it had all these outbuildings, all this agricultural land. When you walked up to it, you knew you were in a historic farm on a farmstead. You knew what it was. And now, over the years, it's been sold off and the land has been developed and it's kind of sitting in the middle of a subdivision. That house doesn't tell its story anymore because it doesn't have all the other things around it, all the other set pieces, so to speak, that help to tell that story and communicate that history. So that house wouldn't have integrity. But also a house that's been so altered over time, and those are all necessary changes, we're not shaming anybody, but it's been so altered over time that it looks like a new house. It doesn't even look like an old house anymore. So that would be another example of one that doesn't have integrity. So we really need to have that sense of time and space that when you walk through that downtown, that commercial downtown, you feel like, ooh, this was established in the early 1900s, or this dates to the 1950s. You want that feeling and that sense of time and space. So that's what we're looking for when we're looking at integrity. A little less clear, but if you have questions about that or whether or not maybe changes over time have affected integrity, please let us know. We don't expect people to live in historic house museums and pristine, absolutely unchanged, but the idea is that if a person who lived there, maybe the person who built that house, came up to it, came through time and showed up on your doorstep, they would be able to recognize that house for what it was. They'd be able to walk through that downtown and recognize it and be like, yeah, this is where I grew up, this is where I lived. That's kind of what we're going for when it comes to integrity. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it still needs to be able to tell its story and give its history to us. So now that you've kind of learned all this about National Register, if you're interested in getting listed in the National Register, how do you get listed? In North Carolina, it's a two-step process. The first step is our state study list. And we don't have a state register here. You might have heard of a state register. I know other states have them. It doesn't really function in the same way. The study list for us is a list of properties that our office feels is either eligible for listing in the National Register or at least deserving of additional study to determine if it could be eligible. It allows us to kind of review those properties and weed out the ones that maybe aren't eligible for the National Register for this particular program, so that you don't go through all that process of writing a nomination, maybe spending time and money doing all of that, to only to find out that it wasn't eligible to begin with. So we want to save you some time on the front end. And just because I'll say this, and I always say this, just because it's not eligible for the National Register doesn't mean that it's not an important property, deserving of preservation, deserving of recognition. It just means that it might not work for this particular program. So state study list is our first step. It's a simple application that we send out to interested parties. They fill it out, provide us with some history, some information about the building, why it's important, but also photos of the interior and exterior of the building. Once we have that application, it's all in hand. It goes before our National Register Advisory Committee, which meets 3 times a year in February, June, and October. So our June meeting is coming up if you're interested. And that's a group of preservation and history professionals that help us make decisions about the eligibility of properties for the study list and also for the National Register. So they also review our National Register nominations. So it gets reviewed at one of the meetings. If they give it the green light, then it's added to the state study list and you can proceed with a National Register nomination with reasonable assurance that it will be listed in the National Register. So again, we're trying to vet those properties and kind of make sure that anything that's moving forward towards that more involved step of actually writing a nomination is actually probably going to be eligible for listing. So you're on the state study list. You can now proceed with a nomination. How do you get that going? There's kind of 2 paths you can take here. We recommend that since these are research-based documents that are prepared to state and federal standards, that you hire someone for listing in the National Register, hire someone to write you a nomination to list something in the National Register. There are National Register consultants that do this professionally. It's basically all they do. And we maintain a list of people who have successfully completed nominations in North Carolina. We won't tell you to hire. We're not saying any of these people are people you should hire, but these are people who have successfully completed that work here in North Carolina, and we can share that with people if they're interested. The other option is that you can write it yourself if you're interested. If you have the time to dig into that kind of project, we are more than happy to walk you through that process, provide you with the information you need, the guidance, and work with you to get that document where it needs to be for sending up to the Park Service. Either one is fine. It just kind of depends, do you have the time or do you have the money? Those are kind of your major choices when you're writing a nomination. Once a nomination is written, it comes to our office and I review it because I'm the National Register person for the Eastern region. So I review that nomination, I work with the preparer to make sure it's all good to go. And then once it's all complete, we have all the materials we need, it's once again goes before our National Register Advisory Committee. They read it, they review it, and if they sign off on it, our State Historic Preservation Officer, Dr. Darren Waters, signs it and it's sent up to the Park Service for their review. And if all goes well and there's no problems, it should be listed in the National Register within 45 days. So that's like the whole process, start to finish. And I know that was a lot of information, so I have it all printed out as well if you would like it in printed form to read, and it's all also on our website and I can send you, if you prefer a digital copy, I also have digital copies I can send y'all. So, because I know that was a ton of information to just throw at you about all of this. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have about National Register, historic properties, anything like that. My contact information as well is on the screen here. And then Reed Thomas and Chris Stone are our 2 restoration specialists in our Greenville office. Reed Thomas is the one who oversees restoration services in Martin County specifically, but he also kind of has our northern eastern counties. So Chowan, he has Dare County, he has Perquimans and Pasquotank as well. And then Chris has the kind of southern section of our eastern counties. So if you're in Nash, Edgecombe, Washington, Beaufort, all that kind of southern portion, that's all Chris's territory as well. So both of them are super knowledgeable and very helpful to work with. So if you have any questions about your historic property, no matter where you live in Eastern North Carolina, they can help you and provide you some information. And I cover all of the East. So if you have National Register questions or survey questions, or just want some information about your historic house in the East, then I'm the person to talk to about that. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, I know I threw a lot of information at you.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What would it take to get a district?
To get a district listed? So districts are a little more involved because there are multiple properties that you're taking into consideration, but the process is pretty similar. If you're interested in a district, I think the first thing is we would like to come out and kind of look at the area that you're thinking of for your district and give you an idea of what the boundaries might be, whether or not that area has integrity. So you kind of look at it on a bigger scale. And there's also a little less, so in an individual nomination, you're really looking at all the physical changes to that building over time. So if it's had replacement windows, that's gonna have a lot more bearing, or maybe changes to the interior. But on a district level, you're really looking at the exterior buildings, you don't do the interior. So sometimes things that don't work on an individual level will work for district. So it's just good to get us out there and look at it. And then in terms of district, you have to, as part of that nomination, you would do a survey first and foremost to figure out your boundaries. You would then, as part of that survey, you write up the inventory for all the buildings. It basically it's literally an inventory of all the buildings in that district boundary. And then everything else about the nomination is pretty similar to an individual nomination. There's a few extra steps. There's some more, like you have to do a lot more mapping and whatnot involved in it. But it's not dissimilar. It is, if you're gonna go the consultant route, it is a little more expensive to do. I won't give you prices because prices nowadays are just all over the place. But it is more expensive to do a district. So I know we've done some grants when our office has given grants for doing a district nomination. I think the most recent payout was maybe $25,000 or $20,000. So it's not cheap. It's not cheap to do. It depends on the size of your district and how much is involved. But I know that was one of the grants that we gave out more recently to do that kind of work. So, but is there a place in particular you're thinking of?
No, we just don't have a district in Houston.
Oh, gotcha.
That's why I was wondering.
Gotcha.
Downtown one, you said?
I think there's a downtown one.
You-
Yeah, I think you do downtown.
Yes.
I think there's a downtown.
That's right, but there is a, I was asking, I'm sorry, Cinnamon Street's what I was looking at.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, so you can have multiple different historic
Right, that's
districts.
right.
So you can have your downtown one, and then you have your residential one.
Right.
If you look at the map for like New Bern and Wilson, it's just they've listed everything in little districts. So you can have as many districts as you want, as long as they all still stand up on their own. So, any other questions I can answer?
I have
For
a
y'all?
question.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a historic place,
Mhm.
but it's a shipwreck sunken out of my front yard, out in the river.
Okay.
In the river. That's really historic
Yeah.
shipwreck because East Carolina has studied it,
Mhm.
the marine people, archaeologists.
Mhm.
And one of the students used it as her master's thesis. So they did a lot of research over 2 summers,
Mhm.
archaeology type things.
Mhm.
Would that be considered a place? I mean, I don't have to preserve anything because it's under the water
Yeah.
and nobody can see it.
I'm not sure, so that's kind of off of the state archaeology territory. They do the underwater archaeology, which I think that would classify as underwater archaeology. So they might already have that mapped and within their database. We don't have
Who does that?
Office of State Archaeology. So they're kind of our counterparts. So we do above ground at the SHPO office, and they're
Okay.
they're part of the SHPO office, but like we My job is the above ground stuff, and they do kind of the below ground and below water stuff.
Okay, different place.
Exactly. So they do, they have a database of archaeological sites, but that's not available to the public because people will loot it and come and steal things. So they try to protect those very, very closely. But I'm sure that's already mapped in their database. And if you're interested in listing that or interested in just getting them to come out and look at it or whatever, I would contact them. I forget, is it in this, which county is it in?
Bertie County.
Bertie County, okay. Bertie is, I think, Will Nassif's territory. Don't quote me on that. He's relatively new. We had a bunch of people shifting around in the state of archaeology, but it's all on their website. They have an interactive map where you can see like who's my archaeologist and go by county. I believe it's Will Nassif, but don't quote me on that. It might be someone else for Bertie. And I would talk to them about whether or not it's already mapped and whether or not they already have files and things on it. And they might want to come out. I think the underwater archaeology lab is at the just went right out of my head, the ship. Whatever the ship is called, I just completely forgot. There's a lab, and I think it's in New Bern or something like that. That they're stationed out that way, and so they could come out and take a look at it if that's something you're interested. Because that sounds really cool. I love the underwater archaeology stuff. I never got into it, but like if I could have another career path, that would be one of the things I'd want to do.
It's really interesting.
It's really cool. So I'm glad we have them, and they're a great resource, and they're great to work with too. So I would definitely reach out to them.
And there's not too many of that kind of thing in our part of the state. There might be down in Wilmington or New Bern or even Edenton.
Yeah.
But
and they're hard to preserve because they're underwater.
They're underwater.
Yeah, and every year it's kind of sands of time kind of situation where they get eroded a little bit every single year. So
well, it's actually everything above the water rotted away.
Gotcha.
And it was only when the water went down very low that I could see what it was.
Cool.
But it doesn't come up. I mean, the water doesn't go down very often in order to be able to see it.
Well, I'm glad the grad students came out and did so much documentation. I hope that's in our files. If it's not, I'm sure they'll want that for their files.
Yeah, well, I'd like to make sure that it is.
Yeah.
If somebody did a master's thesis, they covered that too.
Yeah, and hopefully we try, when people do that kind of research project, we try and get a copy for our archives as well, which are all open to the public as well. So if you're doing research on something, we're a good resource for that too. So we do try and collect that kind of information so that, maybe in another repository at ECU, but then we also have it in our archives and we can send it out to people if we need to. So if they don't already have it, I hope we can get a copy of it for our archives. That's a very cool resource. I would definitely contact them about it.
Yeah, well.
I have a question for you, because I really don't know that much about the National Register. I just see the little signs. So once you're on the National Register, you remain on the National Register?
Yes.
Okay. I also, one thing you told me that I did not know, there are no covenants or anything on these properties. That surprises me. So you go through the process of being placed on the register, but you could kind of do whatever you want to your property.
So to answer your first question, there is a mechanism to remove you from the register, but it's not like we're driving around policing, looking for it. Someone has to apply, and there's a specific process and specific criteria you have to meet in order to be removed. One of them is that the building no longer has the characteristics that make it eligible for listing in the National Register. So if you make too many alterations over time, and say it was eligible for its architecture, and all of the architectural details have been removed, that might be a reason why someone could apply. But again, it's not like we're driving around policing and saying, oh, we're gonna take that one off, we're gonna take that one off. So there is a mechanism, but it's, again, a process. And then in terms of covenants and easements, I believe at some point we did, because I've heard it mentioned that the state did offer that. But if you're interested in a covenant or an easement, you want long-term protections, usually nonprofit organizations are the ones that offer those kinds of preservation covenants and easements. Our office does not hold any. Except for like some from a very long time ago, I think. And Preservation North Carolina, which is the statewide preservation nonprofit, does have a covenants and easement program. So if someone does have, we got a call recently about this, I'll just say it. They get a letter that says, hey, you need to do this, this, and this. or we're gonna take legal action against you. That is not us at the state, that is probably Preservation North Carolina, because they do hold a covenants and easements on a lot of properties. But if that's something you're interested in, they're the ones to contact about it. The thing that we find is that for the most part, people who go through the process of applying for the National Register, spending potentially money, hiring someone to do it, they generally love the building and they want to maintain it. But when they pass away or it's sold or something like that, it may fall into someone else's hands, and they could make changes to it over time that are not compatible with that building, which is why, you know, sometimes when we say the local levels where you get that regulation is where we say preservation gets its teeth is at the local level, because even though it may be a bit of a hassle to go through the commission every time you want to make a change to the exterior of your house, it is a way to protect these buildings so that people can't come in and say build a giant new 7-story hotel right next to your quaint, historic neighborhood, or someone can't come in and, you know, bulldoze a house and put in some monstrosity that's going to block all the view and make the neighborhood look not quite as charming and historic as it used to. So that kind of regulation really comes at the local level. It doesn't come at the national level, unfortunately. So
How much does moving a property affect its qualification for the National Register?
there is, so I talked about criteria. I'll go back. Hold on.
And you may have said it, but
No, I didn't. So I skipped over that a little bit because I didn't want to get too much into the weeds with y'all, but there is, so if you see at the bottom of this screen, it says criterion considerations. So one of the criterion considerations, those are like special criteria that we look at for certain properties, and one of them is moved properties. So it is possible to move a property and then get it listed, or to move a listed property. You just kind of have to be careful about where you're moving it from, where you're moving it to, and making sure that that new site is compatible with the old site. So you want to replicate that original setting as much as possible. So if you're moving it, you know, historic farmhouse, and you're moving it into a downtown area, or it's a denser residential area, that's not maybe going to work. But if you're moving it from, say, one farmstead to another very similar farmstead, and you're maintaining that relationship to the roadway, you're maintaining that general setting, it is possible to move it and then list it, or to then or to move a listed property. You just have to be careful, and there is, if you have a listed property and you need to move it, contact our office first. We need to help you with that process so you maintain that designation. But it is possible to do it. So.
does moving it to a different county or anything like that affect it?
It can. We have seen it happen where someone has moved a property to another county and it gets listed. It really depends on that setting. That's a little bit of a stretch. That's one where I'm like, probably not, but I'm not going to rule it out entirely because it has happened. But that one's a little bit harder. It's easier if you can move it down the road a little bit, or maybe move it a couple miles, maybe move it across the street, something like that. It's a little bit easier for that, but moving it to another county is tough. But not impossible, so it just depends. Any other questions I can answer for y'all? Okay, well, if you think of anything afterwards, I have cards up here with my contact information. And my contact information is going to be on the screen in just a second. So please do not hesitate to, go ahead.
Do you have lists of places that are listed?
Yes.
It's like I don't know of any, so.
They're all on our website, so hpo.nc.gov is our website. You go on there under the National Register tab. One of the options you can choose is properties that are listed in the National Register. We have all of the National Register nominations for North Carolina are on our website and accessible through a PDF. So you can just type in, say you want Martin County, you can type in the search bar Martin County, and it'll bring you everything that's listed in Martin County or Bertie County or Chewan County. And if there's a specific property you're interested in, you can look there. Also, we maintain an online GIS system called HPO Web, which is really fun if you want to spend a couple hours just tooling around the state looking at all the historic properties. They're really fun. So HPO Web, it's an online GIS similar to if you've ever looked at your county GIS for properties. It's similar to that, except it has 140,000 properties mapped on it that are historic across the state. So it's everything from listed properties, things that are on our study list, things that are just surveyed. Maybe they weren't listed particularly, but they've been looked at, they've been documented in our office, and have a survey file in our office. So you can go on that website and just tool around. You can put in an address and search for it. You can look at a town specifically. It's really fun. Again, you can lose a couple hours on it if you're a history nerd like me. And so you can see where things are, not just what's listed, like looking at a list, but you can see where they are. And it's not yet for our surveyed properties, but for our listed properties, there's a link to that nomination. So you can click on a point, it'll bring up a little window, and in there is a link to that nomination PDF. So you can actually access it that way too. So it's really fun to play with.
I can second that, by the way. I've spent multiple
Yeah.
hours on it.
It's fun to play with. And it's a really great resource too. And we are working hopefully to get all of our survey files digitized so they're easier to access. But if you have a question about a property and it's not a National Register property, we do have that file digitized. We can get that file digitized for you individually and send it out to people. So, anyone, yes, sir?
Martin County,
Mm-hmm.
you can see the listing for them. I think it's 20 to 23 sites
Mm-hmm.
that are on the National Register.
Yeah, they're all on there. It's districts
And
and
it gives all when they were
Mhm.
became a part of it, where they are, and a little history about
Mhm.
pictures too.
Yeah. So it's on the county website as well?
I'm not sure about that, but I think so. I think it's under tourism, travel tourism.
I know some counties do that, and they really want to highlight their National Register properties. So that's great. It's great that it's on their website too.
And it's not only individual listings, it's like districts too. 'Cause
Mhm.
Hamilton
Mhm.
is a district, I think it's 65 buildings in that one site
Mhm.
or district.
Yeah, there's a lot of the small towns have districts in them, which is really great.
You do have to be careful though with the districts because, there was some confusion a while back, even in Williamson, about having part of Church Street as a historic district. And then the people will put in individual plaques on their houses. And there was confusion about the district was recognized, but but the houses were not individual, registered on the register as individual historic properties. And there was a little, that's been several years back. But anyway, it's kind of like, you have to be careful when you do a district
Yeah.
about whether a house is actually on the register or if it's the district on the register.
Yeah, and that's where the contributing, non-contributing status comes in. So certain properties within the district are going to be contributing, or meaning that they have integrity, so they maintain all of their historic features and things like that. They date to the period that that district is representing. But then there might be like something built from the 90s, and that's going to be a non-contributing building in that district. So technically everything in that district is listed, but not all of it is contributing. So again, it kind of gets, I understand what you're saying. And you can also have individual buildings that are individually listed and then are also part of the district, so you can have them. So it's, many layers. Any other questions I can answer for y'all? Well, very good. And if you want paper copies of any of the information I've given today, I have them up here. I also have my business cards if you're interested. And just feel free to reach out to us and contact us if you have any questions in the future. And thank you so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate you coming out today.